We just wait. We've still got people coming in.
Okay.
I'll tell you when.
Go back. Yeah.
Sorry, Wright.
So, welcome to this webinar, Plastic in the Food Chain, Can We Do Without It? So I'll stop this slide and let's have a look at the panelists. Good. So we've got here a group of experts with different expertise in related areas to the very difficult problem of what we do about plastic packaging and its importance in the food chain. So, some housekeeping notes. This event is being recorded and the audience microphones and cameras are off. You're very welcome to use the Q&A function to put questions to the panel. So you can do that at any time. And this event is an annual food agenda event. It's been organised with the Cambridge Global Food Security and Energy Transitions at Cambridge IRCs at the University of Cambridge. It's part of the series of Food for Thought panel events. So that's all the housekeeping stuff out of the way, and now we can start this webinar properly. So my name is Claire Barlow. I'm from the engineering department. I'm a materials expert. I'm particularly interested in rubbish. I work on end-of-life materials and plastics in particular. So let me introduce the rest of the panelists. So we have Bryony Rothwell.
Hello.
Who is Recap Partnership Manager. Bryony has worked in local government for over 20 years. She currently works with the Recap Waste Partnership and Cambridgeshire and Peterborough councils to improve efficiency and maximise public engagement with resource and waste services and drive strategy for the partnership. Reducing the impact of waste on the environment is a key driver for the whole partnership. Welcome, Bryony.
Thank you.
Next, Dr. Michelle Cassard, Sustainable Use Director, Plastics Europe. Michelle joined Plastics Europe in 2016. Plastics Europe is the European trade association for the plastics industry, with a membership of more than 100 companies, producing 90% of all polymers across the EU. He coordinates all activities related to the sustainable use of plastics, covering topics such as safety of plastics and microplastics. So welcome, Michelle.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Stephanie Wright, lecturer at the School of Public Health, Imperial College London. Stephanie is a lecturer at the Medical Research Council MRC Centre for the Environment and Health, School of Public Health at Imperial College London. She has over 9 years research experience in the field of microplastics, specifically in exposure and biological impacts. She participated in a European Commission microplastics working group and has contributed towards policy change. So welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Dr. Lily Gia, Senior Research Associate, Institute for Manufacturing, University of Cambridge. Lily leads the Incentivizing Sustainability Programme at the Department of Engineering's Centre for Industrial Sustainability. Her research focuses on incentivizing behaviour changes towards health and environmental sustainability. Her article on motivating actions to mitigate plastic pollution was among the top 50 Earth and Planetary Sciences articles 2019 in Nature Communications.
Thank you, Claire.
So welcome. Now, do we have Claire Hughes? We do have Claire. welcome. So Claire Hughes is Director of Product and Innovation at Sainsbury's. And following studies in parasitology and nutrition, Claire has worked in the food industry since 2005. Part of her role is to help deliver Sainsbury's commitments to halve their overall plastic use by 2025. Now, here's a chance for the audience to tell us something. So what I'd like to do to begin with is to run a poll. I'm going to ask you a question. I'd like the audience to participate in this poll, and I'll tell you what the answer is when you've all participated, or quite a lot of you. But while you're doing that, I'm going to get the panelists to start introducing their particular area of expertise. So you've heard that there's a lot of different areas that we're covering, from the supermarket end through to the effect on human health and everything in between. And so I'm asking the panelists to do a sort of, not quite a minute, but 3 minutes, just to introduce their topics. And so I'm going to start off asking Bryony to introduce her topics, and I'm just starting the poll as well. So you have 2 things to do.
Thank you, Claire. So, plastic in the food chain. As a local government officer, we have been dealing with plastic in the food chain for a very long time. As I understand it, from a report that was produced in 2019, about 3.7 million tonnes of plastic is produced in the UK every year. And about 2.2 million tonnes of that is actually plastic packaging. And my local authorities can vouch for the fact that a lot of that ends up in our curbside collections when we are picking the material up at the household. So that's a huge scale of problem that we're dealing with. And we don't necessarily, as local authority waste managers, see plastic as a problem. Plastic is a vital material that is used in the food chain to maintain the health and safety of the public consuming food. It allows us to transport food all over the world. It allows us to provide convenient and affordable food. But it can, if not treated properly, be a real environmental hazard. And usually this comes about when people don't value the material, the resources that it takes to actually make the material, and the amount of it that we actually produce and use, and what we use it for. And one of the things we see is that there is no respect of that material in the same way as there are for other materials within the waste stream. Metals and glass seem to be treated in a slightly different way to the plastic materials. So what I'm aware of is that there's been some commitments. All of our local authorities have made commitments to try and get rid of a lot of these plastic items over the last few years, because we recognise that people need to be more aware of the resource. So things such as the UK Plastic Pact has identified 8 items that need to be completely stripped out of our social society. Things like plastic stirrers and plastic bowls and plates and cutlery that we might use for picnics this time of year. These kind of materials we just don't value, and we use once and throw away, and it's just such a waste of resources. So as I say, we as a waste management industry think that it's a valuable product and we need to use it. And when we use it and we treat it properly, it actually is a good product. And we have the mechanisms within our waste management to actually deal with that product. If you wash and squash and put your containers in the right bin, we have the processes to take that material from the curbside, to treat it, to process it, sort it, and send it on for recycling. But it's when that material leaks out of the system, when it's littered on the streets, when it's not processed in the right way because it's contaminated. As waste managers, we really struggle with that kind of material because there's no market for contaminated plastics. So it's not all bad news. We are at a turning point, I would say, and it's something that the waste management industry has been looking for years. Packaging has been a problem and a cost to local government for many, many years, but there is light on the horizon. The government brought out the Waste and Resources Strategy in 2018, which is adopting the polluter pays principle with extended producer responsibility. And it's passing the costs back to those companies that manufacture and produce all of the packaging that we have on the market, so that they understand that if they produce something, it has to actually be able to be recycled. It's no good just saying materials are recyclable. We as waste management companies and local authorities need to be able to collect that material and actually recycle it. So I'm hopeful that we are at a change in the road, at a fork in the road, and there'll be a positive outcome from all these new changes coming from the strategy. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, Bryony. That was tremendous. So while you were speaking, the audience was voting, and the results are, so the question was, is plastic for food packaging always bad? So 78% of you think, no, it's not always bad. And 22% say plastic is always bad for packaging. So what we will do is, when we get to the end of this webinar, we'll run the poll again and just see if anybody's changed their minds. But that's very good. Thank you, audience, for participating in that. So, Michelle, would you like to go next?
Yeah, with pleasure. So what you requested me to introduce is to explain why we need packaging in general, and specifically as well plastics packaging. And we have to see that currently there is a lot of pressure to eliminate packaging, but eliminations of packaging and plastics packaging is something that can be very bad from an environmental standpoint, because plastics and packaging in general are firstly used to protect the food from food waste. And this is something which is as well quite important, and we have to avoid food waste. And it's there as well to prevent contaminations. We have to keep in mind that the food chain is something which is very complex. If we look at the European level, we have at European level something like 12 million farms that are producing foodstuff, and those foods then will be transformed by about 300,000 food manufacturers that will then transmit that to a few millions food retailers and food services that will then supply about 500 million inhabitants in Europe. And during all that transfers, the food needs to be protected to ensure that there is no contaminations, nor for the packaging, but of course not for the handling, and as well to avoid food waste. We have to see that for a consumer in Europe, for an average consumer, in terms of carbon footprints, 30% is coming from the food we consume, while from the packaging we only have less than 2%. So on the global footprint, the packaging is a very small part compared to the food. And if you look at food waste, we currently have 20% of the foods that are just wasted. And so there, if you reduce packaging, if you replace the packaging by other type of elements than plastics, the risk is to even increase the carbon footprint. So from an environmental standpoint, we have to be very careful. And it has been demonstrated as well that in most of the case, plastics will consume or will emit 3 to 4 times less carbon than the carbon which might be used in other type of materials. So we have to be very careful when looking about substituting plastics by another materials, that it is done based on a full life cycle analysis and not by some things that can consume more carbon at the end. We can think, for example, there are some cases where, of course, plastics will not be used or will not be needed. Things about waters. Why do you need bottled water at home while you have in a place where you have very safe and clean water? So there is no need to have a bottle, water bottle, but there are places where it's extremely important to be able to receive water bottles. In that case, of course, plastics is very useful due to the weight it has compared to other solutions. So that's I think it's amongst the elements that explain why plastics is so important in the packaging. But of course, it has to be, when we can eliminate that, of course, we have to look about solutions to eliminate packaging, and we need to think about having shorter food supply chain in order to be able to reduce things about the way we are consuming our food. But it's not necessarily eliminating the food, the plastics itself or the packaging. It's really rethinking about all the way to be able to transport the food and as well to recover. It was indicated that plastics is a valuable resource, and this is something it's extremely important, and being able to recover all those plastics and be able to recycle, it's something that's on which we are working very hard and certainly taking some commitments at the level of the plastics producer in order to increase significantly the amount of recycled materials that is coming into the market. But of course, safety from the products that are recycled are as well very important, and there should not be any difference in terms of safety, whether it's materials coming from the recycling or it's a virgin materials.
Great, thank you very much. That was a really helpful summary. Good. So next, Stephanie, would you like to do your 3-minute pitch? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to briefly talk about the bits that we don't see. So that's components of plastic packaging invisible to the naked eye, which could affect our physical state of health. And these are microscopic particle and chemical contaminants derived from plastic. So we ingest both these contaminants in food and drink, and both could affect our health in different ways. So since the 50s, we've been aware of the migration of chemicals from packaging to food, and only a small number of these chemicals has been assessed in terms of its toxicity. And routine testing also doesn't include all types of toxicological assessment, and it doesn't always include endocrine disruption. And so this is something which occurs when a chemical mimics our natural hormone system, and it can enhance or suppress a range of natural biological processes. These chemicals have been linked to obesity, to coronary heart disease, to diabetes and infertility. And many chemicals in plastic packaging are endocrine disruptors. However, due to the high number of chemicals in use, the different migration patterns these have in different foods and different plastics, the different consumption patterns within and between populations, both the level of exposure to and hazard of these chemicals alone or in the mixture that they occur is uncertain, for sure. We're also exposed to a range of particles in our diet, and we have been ever since evolutionary history began, or our evolutionary history began. But recently there's been increasing awareness of synthetic plastic particles called microplastics. So these contaminate food, water, dust and air, leaving no doubt that humans are exposed, and they've even been observed in human stool to prove it. Opening plastic packaging, using new plastic food containers, bottled water can all lead to exposure to thousands of microplastic particles in one go. But what does that really mean for health, and how relevant is that to our everyday exposure? So some studies have started to address this, particularly in mice. So polystyrene microplastics have been the focus of a lot of studies, and when delivered to mice in drinking water, they can cause inflammation in the gut, they can change the microbiota of the gut and even have some reproductive effects. But as mentioned, there's questions over translation of findings in mice to humans, experimental exposures to our everyday exposure, and whether the effects are due to the physical particles or the chemical impurities, and how generalizable this is. That all needs addressing. Equally, we aren't exposed to microplastic particles in isolation, but in a mixture of other natural and man-made particles, which further complicates the matter. And so the relative importance of microplastics, including in the context of chemicals, particles, not just from plastics, but from other sources, needs to be determined. Thank you.
Good, thank you very much. That's it's medium alarming, really. There's a lot of work to be done, but thank you for that very clear exposition. Good. So next, Claire, perhaps you'd like to tell us about your perspective from the Sainsbury's end. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for asking me to take part tonight. Yeah, so plastic for us is something that's it's not only important from an environmental perspective to reduce it, it's also extremely important resonates with customers the most, probably because they can see it and they struggle with some of the other aspects of environment and sustainability because they can't see it and they can't touch and feel it. And that's something that we need to bring to life for them. So we made a commitment in 2019 to reduce plastic not only in baby products but branded products that we sell as well by 50%. It's a really ambitious goal because one of the things that we've caveated around that is that we can't replace it with a raw material that has a bigger environmental impact. Because what we saw originally when there was a focus on packaging weight reduction, there was
Claire, I'm afraid we're not hearing you very clearly at all. There's a lot of sound. Yeah.
I can't plug your phones into the computer, really sorry. Can you hear me?
We can just now, yes.
Can you hear now? I've put the microphone up.
That's better, thank you.
Sorry,
good.
I'll start. Yeah. So how we approach plastic reduction in our products is we've got a combination of remove, reduce, and replace where we can, but also coming back to what Brian said earlier, we actively encouraging our customers to recycle, and we have these recycling facilities into store. We've just launched a flexible plastic sponge where we're collecting soft plastics from customers that are quite often unable to recycle at curbside, but we can take them back alongside branded products, and we can take them and put them back into other products. And so I'm distracted by messages that here say that the people can't hear me. Can you not hear?
It comes and goes.
Right. I'm not sure why. It might be the reception in where I am. It might be the reception, the Wi-Fi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, just at the moment, yes.
Right. I'll try my hardest. Sorry, I'm quite distracted by the messages. I'll try my hardest to speak clearly. I haven't got anything in front of my microphone, so I'm trying my best to speak. So we're approaching it in that way, and also looking at opportunities for customers to where we could do reuse and refill. I think some of the challenges we have on plastic replacement is that often the raw materials that we use have more impact on the environment from a carbon point of view. And one of the things we learned from the Compostable agreement, where there was a focus on lightweighting products and packaging, and back when it was originally came to place, is that a lot of products were put into packaging that could no longer be recycled. So recyclability of our packaging is very important to us. We struggle in some product areas to remove plastic. It's actually an exception in good material for packaging. It protects the products, it extends shelf life where you need it, and it's really flexible for use. So we're presented with challenges to take packaging off where we can to hit our target, but doing the right thing for the broader sustainability agenda at the same time.
Okay, so thank you. We didn't get all of that, but at least we got some of that. So thank you very much for trying. And we'll come back with you some questions later and hope the microphone's behaving a little bit better. But thanks very much for that. So, Lily, it's your turn.
Thank you very much. I would like to talk about the reduction of plastic pollution from consumer behavior perspective. First, I have to clarify that when we talk about reducing plastic pollution, it does not mean sacrificing human well-being like health and safety. So what I'm not going to, for example, to promote like a pre-industrial life here. So I think the real goal for reducing plastic pollution is to improve for human well-being without sacrificing nature environment. And generally speaking, there is about 20% of plastic pollution that can be reduced by avoiding it completely or reuse. for example, like a plastic nets for oranges, which can be avoided. And we can also use reusable tablewares to replace disposable tablewares. So about 80% of plastic pollution can be reduced by redesigning the solutions. For example, like redesign the multi-layer food packaging so that it can be separated and recycled more easily. And all these solutions require strong support from consumer side. So it is important to motivate consumers to reduce plastic pollution. There are economic and non-economic incentives. Sometimes it seems to be easy to say that how about we just tax some of these plastics and so that use the economic incentive to influence the purchases. But because packaging is very, for some plastics and they use the cost is very low, and so you double the price, and the economic incentive may be not that strong. So take an example of the disposable coffee cups. Before the pandemic, coffee shops provided like 10p to 20p per cup discount for people who brought their own cups. And so it only incentivized about 3 to 6% of consumers to use reusable cups instead of disposable cups. And in our university canteens, this percentage is a little higher, is about 10%. But comparing to the 2.5 billion disposable cups thrown away every year in the UK, this economic incentive seems to be not sufficient to reduce the plastic pollution. And so in this way, I think we need to look at the non-economic incentives as well. For example, providing more information to consumers and providing more convenient choices to consumers, and also changing shopping environment to encourage greener consumption, and so on and so forth. And to motivate consumers to reduce plastic pollution, it is also important to understand that so consumers really need and distinguish the potential demand and reviewed demand. So what the reviewed demand is what we often observe what people are purchasing. But what we often didn't know is what is the potential demand, which is consumers may need, but they don't have these options at the moment. So we don't know what they need. And for example, if all the apples are packed with plastic packaging, that means like consumers have to purchase those apples. But it doesn't mean like that the consumers really need that apple packaging. So that's a kind of example. And if all these apples and oranges can be sold in loose, and people may also happy to purchase. So this is a kind of example. And so this is a kind of low effort way for consumers to reduce the plastic pollution. So if food businesses could provide more options like this, and it will incentivize consumers and to coordinate and reduce plastic pollution together. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you all very much indeed. That was really helpful. So we've highlighted quite a lot of different areas here. And actually, I'd like to come back to Michelle here to begin with. So the additives in food contact material and some of the safety aspects. Would you like to enlarge on that a bit? Because that impacts quite a lot of what we've been talking about, I think.
Yeah, and I think this is a clear, very important point. And in Europe, and it's the same as well, in fact, in all Europe's, only additives that have been assessed and that are on the positive list can be used. So I think that's something which is really important in food contact materials, and this is valid for plastics. This is not necessarily valid for all type of materials, but in plastics, only additives that are evaluated by EFSA are authorized. And it's the duty as well of the producers to ensure that the migrations limit is below any threshold that has been set up by the authorities. And we have as well to check if there might be the presence of genotoxic substance or things that are not necessary, that are contaminants and things like that. and with extremely low targets. If we have we have to ensure that if there is any presence of such a genotoxic type of additive, the possible migrations is below the 0.15 ppb limits, which is so extremely low. And this is important to do that at all along the value chains. And there is no even an obligation to communicate about any presence of such type of elements if it's detected somewhere along the value chain. So I think it's, we always speak about some elements that can be present in plastics, and yes, in some plastics, in some specific applications, there might be the need of specific additive for some specific needs, like I think for some applications when you will need fire resistance for good safety reasons. But those type of additive will never be used in food contact materials. It's completely forbidden. You can only use additives that are evaluated.
Good, thank you. I wonder, Bryony, whether you'd like to come in there a bit and talk about how it impacts your operations.
In terms of the different types of plastics and the way that we have to try and provide disposal mechanisms for anything that's put on the market. And this is what we as a waste management industry have been struggling with for many years, and why we're crying out for the changes that are coming, is because it's very difficult for us to always be ahead of the curve with the technology to dispose of the waste and identifying those different polymers. There are some very clever technologies that we have in our sorting facility in Cambridgeshire, which can identify by infrared light and select out materials when they're going through a conveyor belt system. It blows jets of air, and it's amazing to watch because you see all these bottles pinging off and they're identifying the different polymers. But again, there's so many that come onto the market for the different reasons of keeping food safe and, you know, fresh and looking the way that retailers want it, and we can't keep ahead of all of that. And so it's for us, having a core set of materials that the industry focus on will allow us to have better a better grip on those disposal routes, because we know they've got a consistent set of materials coming in. So even though we can make those different polymers, it doesn't necessarily mean to say we should, because if you do, then more material is likely to be rejected from the system and not recycled.
Okay, good. Would anybody else like to come in on any aspect of this? And Stephanie, I thought you might want to say something. Please fire away.
Well, I just wanted to raise the issue of non-intentionally added substances as well. So whilst some of the additives that are included are covered by regulations, of course, there are a lot of things present, impurities. For example, the additives that are present may react, they may degrade, there may be other impurities present, and these are generally unknown and present in, you know, relatively high numbers. And they are difficult to risk assess because they're impurities, they're hard to get hold of in a pure form for tox testing. But also, you know, we don't always know what's even there. So I just raised the point that whilst there may be regulations and risk assessment for certain types of chemicals, it's definitely not all encompassing with respect to what we're exposed to. And so there are a lot of unknowns, I guess, which from a health perspective is quite worrying.
Good. Okay, thank you very much. So we've had a question about what can we do to move food companies towards using more sustainable packaging? And the example given in the question is, must yogurt come in a plastic tub, for example? Now, this is something which I work on and think about quite a lot. And so I'm going to leap in here first to say that if you don't have your yogurt in a plastic tub, then you need to package it in something else, clearly, because it's a liquid or a semi-solid. And so you've got to have some way of handling it. And what a lot of people would like is something that really feels classy, which is a glass container for the yogurt. Now, actually, this may not be the best material to be using because it's very heavy and the yogurt is being transported, and a lot of the weight is now going to be the container. And so it's going to add fuel costs to the transport of the yogurt. And the use of glass, it's not really quite as it should be, because at the end of life of that glass, we need to actually break it up, usually melt it down and turn it into something else, which uses a huge amount of energy. So glass isn't actually the most wonderful material for packaging. And I can see Claire nodding there. And so it may be that the plastic is the best here. Yeah, Claire, would you like to say something? Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me. Yes, in that case, it would be for the reasons you've said, but also glass can be extremely hard to handle in factories, and many factories don't want to handle glass because of breakages. So you would only use glass in a factory where it handles quite a lot of glass, so it causes other problems beyond the environmental impact of the raw material.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that. So just to say that Sainsbury's, Claire speaking for Sainsbury's, agrees that glass is actually quite a problematic material with the breakages point of view as well. So if I may express an opinion, please don't press for glass as the best packaging material. But thank you. Good. Now, let's look at a slightly different aspect here with compostable bags. Now, again, this is something that people think is a wonderful thing to have, compostable bags, because they're not going to end up polluting the environment. But would somebody like to give us the lowdown on actually what happens with compostable bags, and are they as green as people believe they are? Bryony.
So I'm happy to give a perspective as local authorities who, we would normally wish to embrace something that would seem like a sensible alternative to plastics. But the problem with any form of cornstarch or potato starch bag is how you differentiate that material from other materials. And currently our waste management facilities are not sophisticated enough to be able to determine the difference between a plastic bag and a cornstarch bag. So if you were to use a cornstarch bag to put your green waste in, or your food waste in, and it goes into your green bin in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, for instance, it goes to a plant in Waterbeach, which is an in-vessel composter, and at the front end of that facility, all the material will be screened for what looks like plastic. Sorry, there's a rabbit in the background. I have a house rabbit. You're not seeing things. I kept the children out, but not the rabbit. So if you do have those materials in your waste stream, then consequently they'll get screened out and they'll get put into the pile to be rejected in the same way that a plastic bag will be. And what we don't want people to do is to go to the effort and energy of putting something into that processing plant that then we have to reject as contamination. And the other issue with compostable bags is in commercial recycling facilities or commercial composting facilities, the time that we have the material in those facilities is around 7 weeks. Some of these materials take much longer, and they're designed for home compost bins, not commercial facilities. And I'm yet to be aware of, and there may be, but I'm yet to be aware of that kind of material that's been proved to actually biodegrade at the same time as an IVC plant. So we encourage residents not to use those kinds of bags and not to go to the expense, because it will be treated in the same way as plastic.
Good. Thank you for that. I wonder whether, Michelle, you wanted to come in on that as well.
Yes, certainly we can add that the experience shows well that as it was said, in many cases, this compostable bag, it will not solve the litter issue. If people continue to just not treat properly their waste at the end of the use, and it's going out and just being simply littered, in many cases it will not decompose as well, because the conditions of degradations will not be there. So the products will stay there as well for for very long. So that's, and even in the marine environments, if you end up with those type of products in the marine environments, since it's take very long to degrade it in low temperature conditions, in the sea waters condition, at the end it's not the solution. So compostable bag is maybe in some case, some things when there is no other way to handle properly the end of life, then maybe it can be a solution. But the first thing is that has been mentioned as well by Lily, is education. It's working properly to ensure that materials are not handling into the environments. That's what is the most important things, and that's what we can then recycle them and we can reuse. And on top, I think what is important is that in most of the case, when we do produce plastics, it's what do the value of plastic? It's because it's durable. It's because when you make your packaging with your plastics, you don't want to decompose that all along during the value chains, during the transport. You want to have the products very safe up to the end. And so replacing by some things that can degrade and decompose and probably as well release other elements, that's not the best solution. No?
Good. Thank you very much. So let's turn now to really the all-important bit, which is how we get people to do sensible things and behave in ways which are really sustainable. So Lily, I wonder whether perhaps you can comment on some of the aspects of this. So if we reduce the use of plastics, then are we sacrificing life quality, and how will people react to that?
Yeah, I think there's people may have worries about sacrificing life quality and less convenient, but actually it's not necessary to be like that. For example, we see, for example, in some loose fruits and vegetables, and it's very easy to just pick up and so get what the quantity you need, and it's not necessary to be packed in a plastic package. And so it's about, when we talk about what people need, and I think we need to have a good understanding what people really need in that product. So give an example about a package of apples, like 6 apples in one package, right? If you just have this option, you take these apples and people may believe that people need the apple and itself, and also people may need this convenience of the packaging, and that's how it was designed. Or maybe think, okay, it looks nice and things like that. So all these different characteristics embedded in this product, it seems like combined together is what people need. But if you rethink about it, do we really need that? Especially now we know it's quite well known about how plastic pollution can, what the kind of negative impacts of the plastics waste. And people start to realize that we do want to have a better environment. So when they start to purchase products, they start to think whether this type of product really has environmental value in it. Is there any better way of doing that? So that's changed. What people need actually has been changing. So when we think about the food solutions and how to design the food service and products, and think in that way, it will be easier and to understand what people need. And in that way, consumers, when they buy it, they also feel happy. It's not about the products about it. Yeah, in psychology, in economics and psychology, there is a term called warm glow, and there's a paper about it, and it's about people feel good about behaving environmentally friendly, and they do have these good feeling good effect actually can help people perceive the higher room temperature. So there is a kind of a linkage, yeah, kind of interesting effect. But that shows that people do perceive this benefit, this environmental benefit corresponding to their own behavior.
Okay, good. One of the aspects of the food packaging is this lengthening of the supply chain, and the fact that it lets me, eat grapes all through the year, which are being imported from all over the world, which we couldn't do without really this plastic packaging. But I wonder whether the supermarkets are going to make sure that I don't get a warm glow if I purchase grapes which have come from Chile. How do we tackle that? How can we actually help people to value more local produce, which doesn't perhaps need so much packaging?
I think the reality is, having spent a lot of time doing what Lily just described, designing products for customers, is that the customers, even if you have local produce, you would probably have to put the product in packaging, because some products are very vulnerable to damage, and the packaging protects them. And as soon as you take them out of the packaging, whether they come from Chile or the UK, there's a lot of waste. So it's working out where you can have products and control the waste, and where you can take products out and they're quite robust. So things like cabbages. Cabbages are fairly robust, and you've been able to take them out of plastic bags and just put them in the trays in the supermarket. But there's some knock-on consequences that you have to consider as well when you're removing consumer-facing packaging, that you don't end up with more packaging in your supply chain that's protecting the product. So we have to look at the end-to-end process where we can take it out of the supply chain, where we take it out of packaging, and we have to do them up alongside food, because we don't want to end up with more wasted vegetables and fruits, and because they're damaged, and it is. And also from a customer perspective, I'm hoping this behaviour will change. For some customers over the last year with COVID, they have some concerns about products that are loose.
Thank you. We got part of that, but thank you for trying. Good. Okay. I'd like to come back actually to Bryony, if I may. So we're sending a lot of our rubbish to Turkey. Is that...
I can assure you in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough we're not. This is obviously a concern that residents have about where their material is ending up, and it's terrible when you hear these stories, and it worries all of us to be sure that we're doing the right thing. We as local authorities tender contracts and work with responsible contractors to take our material, process it and treat it in the way that we need it treated. Is there more we can be doing? Possibly. The tracing and traceability of waste is something that is a key question for the market. We are going to be seeing, I think, more of that coming to the fore, and I'm sure there's experts on the panel that have more understanding of what's being done in that sphere. But the ability for us to actually monitor where a plastic bottle that's put in a recycling bin in Cambridgeshire ends up is near impossible at the moment. But there are things being looked at of how we can trace those materials through the logistics chain, and part of the changes with extended producer responsibility is asking producers of packaging to actually think about that. And there is also proposals for a deposit return scheme. So on certain materials, a deposit will be payable by the consumer to make sure that material is put back into a recycling process. And again, you need a way of tracing that bottle or can so that you can actually know that redemption of the deposit has been made once that person has recycled it. So there's some big changes for consumers coming. Unfortunately, the cost that's going to be borne on that will potentially be the consumer as well, but it will hopefully make people think about the choices they're making in the products they're buying and the types of materials those products are, because this is designed to try and make more of our packaging recyclable and more of it to go through the system and be a closed loop system rather than a linear system.
Okay, good. I'm just going to keep you on the hot spot, because there's a question which people come up with so frequently, which is, why don't we have uniform regulations for what we put in our bins?
Oh, great question, Claire. It frustrates me. I'm a partnership manager, so I work with 7 authorities in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and they don't do the same things. They don't have the same colour bins, they don't put the same materials in them, because our recycling schemes have evolved over the last 25 years, and the discretion of how to roll those out was done at a local level. So each authority was able to decide as and when they wanted to roll their curbside recycling out, on what materials they wanted to collect. And many people remember in the early days, you could put all sorts of things out, your textiles, your batteries, your, plastic cans, papers, everything. And we would have little bags of this and little bags of that and boxes of this. And we moved away from that into what's called a commingled recycling scheme, which means we've now got one bin that you can put all the recyclable materials into. But again, not always the same set of materials, because different authorities do it differently, because they have different disposal contracts at the end. But the resources and waste strategy, part of that is calling for consistency in the waste industry at a local authority level. It's asking all of us to think about what are those core materials that every householder should be able to recycle at their curbside. So there's 6 materials they've put in the consultation, and it's all the biggies: glass, paper, cardboard, testing now food, plastics, and there's one other, metal. So those 6 items, every local authority should consistently collect at the curbside. And what they are also looking at us to do is to make sure that the quality of those materials that go in that collection are as good as they possibly can be to enable them to be recycled. So we get a lot of contamination in our recycling. People often put materials into the recycling bin without washing it. So we get food contamination, which causes lots of material to be rejected because it's got contamination on it. So the public has a job to do to present that material in a way that we can recycle it. And picking up a point that was made earlier about glass and changing products to things like glass, glass is a terrible product to mix with other recycling products. It's incredibly destructive with other materials. So if you put it with paper and cardboard, it causes real problems for the fibre manufacturers who want to take that paper and cardboard and make more paper and cardboard. So there's a push for us to divide the materials more. So going back to a scheme where actually we are separating the quality of the material so that more of that good quality recycler that people are presenting to us at the curbside can actually go on to be recycled.
Good, thank you. Now, there are zillions of wonderful questions which have come up, but I think we're drawing to an end. I'd just like to finish with one more question for Stephanie, please, which is about the effects of plastics used in packaging. And so, what evidence is there for the effects that it has on human health?
So thank you. It's really challenging, and that's because really, I guess, to interpret health effects and risk, you have to know both exposure and toxicity. And at present, I'd say there are substantial knowledge gaps for both of those things, whether microplastic or plastic chemical. The other challenge, aside from this lack of data, is, as I've mentioned, the fact that there are other impurities present and non-intentionally added substances present, that they are present in a mixture rather than as individual substances. But I think the biggest challenge at all for interpreting health effects related to packaging solely is the fact that a lot of these, or some of the main chemicals at least that we're aware of in respect to health effects, don't just come from packaging. There's like a multitude of exposure pathways. And so actually teasing out or understanding the relative contribution, say from packaging versus dust versus a different type of exposure, is actually quite difficult and isn't really known. So I'd say those are the key issues, at least for understanding regulation and how we can regulate these things, and really what's hindering, I guess, our understanding of health effects. There's chemicals present. We know they're linked to health, but we don't really know what degree is coming from packaging versus other sources.
Yeah, good, thank you very much. So I'm afraid we really are drawing to a close, but what I'd like to do is just to ask each of the panelists to give no more than 30 seconds a take-home message which they'd like to put to the audience, so to highlight something that they'd really like people to remember. Okay? So while people are talking, I'll put up the poll and see whether we've got any change in the views that people have. And so what I'll do is to go through in the same order that we had right at the start, and ask Bryony, please, to just give us your 30-second summary.
Please wash, squash, and put your recycling in the right bin, and then your recycling will get recycled.
Good. Michelle.
I will go along the same directions. There is a lot of developments going on in order to be able to recycle more and to increase the level of recycle in all materials. And for that, we need that materials is going into the recycle are properly treated, are properly handled, and that the industry can recover those recycled plastics in order to renew and make new virgin high quality plastics.
Good. Thank you very much. Stephanie.
I think my final thoughts are just that I guess I hope, you know, moving forward, any unnecessary exposures to potentially toxic pollutants are minimised, that producers are transparent about what might inadvertently be in our food chain, but also that any alternatives are fully assessed before they're put into use. And I guess that connects into both life cycle assessment and risk, you know, human health risk assessment as well.
Very good. Thank you. Claire. We're not hearing you.
Okay. Yeah, I won't do.
Okay, good. So people going to the supermarket, you know, think about the things that people have been talking about and use your packaging sensibly. And Lily.
Yeah, I think for consumers, it's very important to realize that we have our role in reducing plastic pollution as well. And so we could contribute more than we could think of. And it's great to coordinate with food businesses and local councils and help recycle and reduce the plastic pollutions.
Yeah, very good. And my, I think, take-home message is that packaging is really useful stuff. We do need some of it. We need to respect it and treat the plastic rubbish with respect and wash and squash it. And to be very careful about immediately going to substitute materials for plastic, because actually plastic may be the best material in environmental terms, preventing food waste, and with very light to transport, as long as we can manage to dispose of it properly at end of life. So really, it's all down to your crew, Bryony, and yours, Lily, for getting people to do the right things, and then we can deal with the plastic properly. Okay, good. So the results of the poll, thank you for voting. So we're now up to 87% who think that plastic is not always bad. And so I think we may have won a few converts to thinking that maybe plastic is a really viable material as long as we can get the end of life sorted out. So thank you for your participation. Thank you for coming. And the next event in the Food for Thought webinar series is Healthy Eating, What Makes It So Hard? And that's on Monday, the 21st of June at 6:30, the same time. And I think that you're on a mailing list for people to be alerted about that. So thank you all very much. We've had a wonderful time. I hope you have too. So thank you.